everybody, welcome to another edition of Vinyl Fetish, the Vinyl Fetish Club, where we're going through our 100 albums that matter, 100 albums that you need to have in your collection. We are going to talk about live albums today, and before we get started, live music, for some reason, makes me think of whiskey. Pendleton whiskey, added to a little bit of ginger ale just to aid this conversation. We're going to talk about maybe my favorite live album of all time today, ArethaFranklin's Live at the Fillmore West, 1971. Why is this record so great? Well, for many reasons. She has an amazing band on this record. She's backed up by the King Curtis Band, which included, at this show at least, Billy Preston on the Hammond organ, and was recorded at the Fillmore West, which was built by Bill Graham, or opened by Bill Graham, to sort of be a West Coast version of the Fillmore East on the Lower East Side, where a lot of the kind of great underground rock was happening. The Fillmore West was a place where people like the Grateful Dead, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin. Fillmore West was sort of the place to be, kind of in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. This album is important for a couple of reasons. It's when Aretha starts embracing some of the racial politics of the late 60s. The album that came after this was the Young, Gifted, and Black album. And the album that preceded this was the Spirit in the Dark album. But more importantly, it's her take on the counterculture of the 60s, where she is doing Simon and Garfunkel, she's doing Stephen Stills, she's doing the Beatles, and kind of slowing them down and taking them back to their black roots. Because we know a lot of this music starts with black music, and then white artists like the Beatles kind of give it their own spin. She's really bringing it back to a more soulful, slow groove. There's a million great highlights on this record. Her version of Dr. Feelgood will stop you in your tracks. It is just so on point. The highlight has to be when Brother Ray shows up. Brother Ray Charles, at the peak of his powers, sits in with the band for the song Spirit in the Dark, and they just riff. They just groove. It is the height of late 60s, early 70s soul power, and Aretha, you know, that starts with Respect. Like, Respect was her big hit that sort of moved her. I mean, there's a movie out about her, and you know, Respect is sort of a turning point in her career. She reconstructs Respect in a different form, not to sound like the hit. It came out in 1967. By 1971, she's totally reimagined that Respect is a civil rights anthem. And the part where Ray Charles comes in is just amazing. And so it is really Aretha firing on all cylinders. This record is so great that I can never stop listening to it. They recently, in 2006, released a multiple disc CD edition that include all the sets at the Fillmore West shows, including the King Curtis songs, including Billy Preston singing My Sweet Lord, because he had just been playing on George Harrison's All Things Must Pass record, and after this went on to play at the concert for Bangladesh a few months later. It's great to hear all those songs and all those different versions, but really this is all you need. This one album. I mean, just look at the crowd. And this club closed down a few months after. On July 4th, 1971, the Fillmore West was history. Bill Graham had to close it down, kept the Fillmore West in sort of the memory banks, while the Fillmore East still had a few more years. I learned about this record actually in Ireland, where there's another Bill Graham, who is a music writer for Hot Press, invited me to his house to play records and drink beer, and this was the record he pulled out, and I just sat there gobsmacked. I couldn't believe how great this record was, the incredible soul power. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit about today, so this Aretha Franklin record, there's a ton of great Aretha albums, and people have greatest hits, and you know, all the CDs you want, but if you really want one vinyl LP from Aretha in your collection, this is the one. It is sort of forgotten by the people who just know the hits. A Moment in Time. A Moment in Time. East meets West, white meets black, hippie meets soul. It's all right here on this record. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this record today is why do we love live albums so much? What is it about a live album? When I was 12 years old, you know, we were obsessed with Kiss Alive, and more importantly, Frampton Comes Alive. Those were things that dominate our lives. What is it about the live album? Something that we've kind of lost over the last few years, the joy of a live album. And one of the things about live albums that made them so huge in the 1970s is that you become a part of the show. The audience is a part of the show. If you get to listen to the old Sam Cooke live albums, there's one recorded in Harlem where there's incredible amounts of banter with the audience, and the audience is actually sort of part of the show. A year later, he releases one recorded at the Copa with a more white audience. Not so much interaction then, not so much banter. But if you think about the live album and the audience being a part of it, it's a chance for you to be a part of the show. I got to see Blue Oyster Cult live in 1978, and they told us they were recording it for a live album that became the Some Enchanted Evening album, and we were just sort of screaming, "Rita in high school!" But if you listen to live albums, you will pay attention to those moments in the audience. On Frampton Comes Alive, there's a firecracker that goes off during a quiet moment, which is something that used to happen a lot at concerts in the 70s. There are times where there is really great interaction between the leader of the band and the audience. So I think about the Rolling Stones, thinking a lot about the Rolling Stones as we mark the passing of Charlie Watts. This was a shirt I got seeing the Stones in Atlanta at the Fox Theater in 1981 on the Tattoo You tour with Stray Cats opening. Still fits, thank you very much. But one of the great live albums of all time is 1970's Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. And how can you think of that album without hearing the young girls say, "Paint it black, you devil," to Mick Jagger, right? I mean, that is a part of that album. You can't listen to that album without hearing that woman. And there's another great example, which is one of my favorite live albums also, which is Cheap Trick's Live at Budokan, coming out in 1979. Listen to just the first 2 minutes of Ain't That a Shame, and the Japanese crowd screaming. That is pure joy. The pure joy of hearing live music. It's not the band that you're listening to, it is the kids at the Budokan screaming their lungs out. There's so many great moments on live albums where the audience becomes a part of the listening experience, and I think that's why we love live albums so much. You know, live albums have taken a hit. I mean, one of the things that happened in the 70s is a lot of artists didn't like the way they sounded on their live recordings and re-recorded them. Kiss Alive 2 is basically a studio album with, you know, audience sounds dubbed in. Wings Over America. You know, Paul McCartney, of course, being the perfectionist, went back and re-recorded most of that record, so you're hearing a studio recording. But on a really good live album, you get to feel the participation of the fans in the music. And of course, the artists feed off of that, right? They are better performers because of the feedback they're getting from the crowds. And as someone who worked in live music for a while, you know the bands always feel better when they get a great response from the audience. It makes for a great show. And so I think there's an opportunity here to listen to live music as we get back out in the world, hopefully, Delta variant notwithstanding, but also as we listen to live albums and think about that interplay between the audience and the performer, and how exciting that could be for those performers to have an additional person on stage, essentially, the audience as another member of the band. So ArethaFranklin live at the Fillmore West, just a great, great album. Search it out, find it on vinyl. It is magnificent. Okay, that's a quickie. I'm going to try to make these a little bit shorter. Next week we're going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to go ambient. We're going to be talking about Brian Eno's landmark album, Music for Airports. Music for Airports, Ambient 1. That's going to be a really interesting conversation, so I can't wait to talk about Eno. We've got to get to Eno sooner or later. I have to say, you know, as we do these 100 albums that matter, this album matters. This album really matters. It is such a moment in time. It captures so many intersecting phenomena that were happening at the turn of the decade as the 60s became the 70s. It's like a big Venn diagram, but it's also just a joy to listen to. And listen to the audience. Listen to the audience, especially when Ray Charles starts in on Spirit of the Night. It is just pure pleasure. So this music matters. These records matter. You matter. So let's talk about it.